Hello, and welcome to my channel. Today's story is going to chill your spine and make you look over your shoulder while watching. This is the terrifying tale of a mysterious Labubu doll and the haunted house that kept its secrets hidden for decades. So grab your headphones, turn off the lights, and let's begin.
It all began on a cold evening in October. A young couple, Daniel and Sarah, moved into a quiet old town on the edge of the forest. They were excited to start a new chapter of their lives. Their new home was a century-old wooden house, creaking at every step, but beautiful in its own strange way. As they unpacked boxes in the dusty attic, Sarah found something unusual. It was a Labubu doll, its stitched smile stretched too wide, glass eyes reflecting light even in the dark. It wore a tiny torn coat and smelled faintly like old wood and damp walls. Sarah laughed and decided to keep it on the fireplace mantel in the living room. But Daniel felt uneasy. He couldn't explain why, but the doll's eyes felt like they followed him. That night, as the couple lay in bed, they heard small footsteps on the wooden floor. Tap, tap, tap. Daniel thought it was a raccoon. He went downstairs with a flashlight. The house was silent. Then suddenly, a loud thud came from the attic. Daniel ran upstairs, heart racing. He opened the attic door slowly and saw the Labubu doll lying in the middle of the floor, even though Sarah had placed it in the living room. A cold wind blew through the attic. The bulb flickered, and then he heard. Over the next few days, creepy things started happening. The TV would turn on by itself at 3 a.m., playing static. Doors slammed suddenly, even with no wind. Footsteps echoed in empty hallways. Sarah swore she saw a shadow moving behind her in the mirror. Daniel set up cameras around the house to catch what was going on. The next morning, they reviewed the footage. In one clip, from the living room at midnight, they saw the Labubu doll turn its head slowly toward the camera. In another, it appeared to move from the chair to the floor on its own. They thought it was a glitch, until Daniel heard whispers right behind his ear when he was alone. Daniel decided to research the house. He discovered that decades ago, a toy maker had lived there with his daughter. One night, the entire family vanished without a trace. Only the Labubu doll was found in the house, sitting by the fireplace. He went back to the attic at night with his camera, determined to get proof. The moment he stepped in, the temperature dropped suddenly. His breath became visible. The attic door slammed shut behind him. The doll was sitting in the corner, facing the wall. Then slowly, it turned its head toward him. All the lights went out. Daniel's flashlight flickered. And then, a pale, ghostly figure crawled across the attic ceiling, eyes glowing white. Sarah found Daniel the next morning in the attic, sitting motionless in a chair, the Labubu doll in his lap. He wouldn't speak. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly. She called a paranormal expert, who explained that the doll was a vessel, a cursed object used to bind a spirit to the house. The only way to break the curse was to burn the doll inside the attic, exactly where it was found. Sarah gathered courage and went up that night alone. The doll was no longer on the chair. It was standing upright in the middle of the room. As she lit the match, all the doors began banging, lights bursting, and ghostly screams filled the house. She threw the doll into the fire. The flames turned green, and a piercing scream. Weeks passed. Daniel slowly recovered, though he never spoke of that night again. The house felt normal again. But one evening, as Sarah was closing the curtains, she noticed something outside in the bushes, a pair of tiny glowing eyes watching the house. She opened the door slowly. No one was there. But on the porch sat a brand new Labubu doll, smiling up at her. I want to give you a serious warning. Many people believe that this Labubu doll is just a toy, while it is not true. It's a devil. Several buyers have shared terrifying experiences after bringing it into their homes. From unexplainable shadows, moving objects, strange whispers at night, to paranormal attacks. Their lives were never the same again. If you ever see this doll being sold online or in any shop, avoid buying it. Because once you bring it home, you might be inviting something dark, something you can't control. Think twice before you decide.
This is our second story of the night. This one is darker than the last. A small, innocent-looking doll hides secrets no one dares to speak about. Its name is Labubu, and it only comes alive when no one is watching. Beware. If you hear giggles in the shadows, it might be too late. On a stormy evening, a young girl named Mia found an old, dusty box at her doorstep. Inside was a doll with glassy eyes and a stitched smile, Labubu. Mia thought it was just a toy, but as the night fell, whispers echoed through the empty house. Something was watching her. At midnight, Mia woke to see the doll sitting at the foot of her bed. She hadn't moved it. Its head turned slowly, and it whispered her name. Heart racing, she tried to scream, but no sound came out. Labubu's grin seemed wider than before. Every corner of the house was dark, yet moving shadows danced along the walls. Objects shifted places. Lights flickered on and off. Mia realized Labubu wasn't just a toy. It controlled the house, and maybe her mind. A crumpled note appeared on the kitchen table. "Play with me, or stay forever." Mia knew she hadn't written it. Every clock in the house stopped at 3:33 a.m. Labubu's giggles echoed louder. Mia tried to leave the house, but doors slammed shut. Windows locked. Shadows followed her steps. Labubu appeared in the hallway, closer each time she blinked. She realized the doll's eyes were following her, even when she closed her own. Mia called her best friend. She screamed over the phone, telling her to burn the doll. Labubu's laugh suddenly came through the speaker. The line went dead. Something had crossed into the real world. Furniture flew across rooms. Pictures on walls shattered. Labubu's stitched smile glowed faintly in the darkness. Mia tried hiding, but the doll always found her. Its whispers promised, "You can't hide from me." Desperate, Mia remembered an old book in the attic, instructions on how to trap cursed objects. She gathered salt, candles, and a circle of chalk. As she started chanting, Labubu moved on its own. Faster, angrier. The wind howled, and shadows lunged from every corner. Mia faced Labubu in the center of the chalk circle. The doll's eyes glowed red. His grin widened unnaturally. She finished the incantation. A blinding light filled the room. Labubu shrieked and fell silent. For a moment. Morning came. The house was quiet. Labubu lay motionless on the floor, its smile fading. Mia exhaled, thinking it was over. But from the attic, faint giggles echoed. Labubu was still there, waiting for nightfall.
And now, for our third story of the night. This one is unlike the previous tales. It is about a mirror that doesn't just reflect your face, it reflects your fears. And sometimes, it can trap your soul. If you see your reflection smile back, even when you're not smiling, run. A young man named Ethan moved into an old apartment. While cleaning the attic, he discovered an antique mirror covered with a black cloth. The frame was ornate, carved with strange symbols. When he pulled off the cloth, he saw his reflection. But something felt wrong. His reflection blinked when he hadn't. That night, Ethan noticed small changes. The mirror seemed to glow faintly. Objects in his room moved slightly, his reflection moving before him. A voice whispered from the glass, "Look closer." Heart racing, Ethan tried to step back. But the mirror wouldn't let him go. The next evening, Ethan stood in front of the mirror. His reflection began speaking, "You can't leave. You belong here." Terrified, Ethan reached to touch the glass. His hand was pulled in. Halfway. A cold force tried to drag him inside, and he barely escaped. Ethan searched online and found the mirror's dark history. Every previous owner vanished mysteriously. Legend said the mirror was cursed by a vengeful spirit, feeding on fear. Once you look into it with doubt or terror, it traps your soul. Piece by piece. Objects in the apartment started moving on their own. Lights flickered. Shadows appeared inside the mirror. Even when the room was empty. Ethan's reflection would sometimes smile, while he was frowning. Sleep became impossible, the mirror's whispers haunted him day and night. Ethan decided to throw the mirror out of the window. But every time he tried, it reappeared inside the apartment. No matter what he did, it always returned. The reflection grew bolder, mocking him, showing things from his past he wanted to forget. A friend suggested burning it, but when Ethan tried, water poured from the mirror instead of flames. The mirror seemed alive. Its reflection showed his own terrified face, screaming for help. And the reflection whispered, "You cannot destroy me." One night, Ethan woke up and found his reflection missing. In the mirror stood a sinister version of himself, smiling cruelly. It stepped out, leaving the mirror empty. Ethan was trapped inside, screaming silently, reflected forever, while the mirror sat quietly in the room. The next tenant moved in, unaware. The mirror waited patiently. And if you look into it tonight, it might be your reflection smiling back. Even when you're not smiling. The apartment was empty. But a faint whisper could be heard, "I see you." And sometimes, if you stare too long, the mirror shows a face that isn't yours. And you realize it may already have chosen you as its next victim. The apartment was empty. But a faint whisper could be heard, "I see you." And sometimes, if you stare too long, the mirror shows a face that isn't yours. And you realize it may already have chosen you as its next victim.
Welcome. For tonight's final tale, we are going somewhere few dare to step. Deep in the woods lies an abandoned asylum, long forgotten, yet whispers of its past still linger. They say anyone who enters never truly leaves. And sometimes, the asylum itself chooses who stays. Tonight, we follow Liam, a curious urban explorer, who is about to discover why this place was shut down. And why some doors should never be opened. Liam parked his van at the edge of the forest. The overgrown path to the asylum was barely visible. Rusted gates creaked as he pushed them open. Broken windows and graffiti-covered walls gave the first hint of neglect, but the silence was worse. It felt alive, almost as if the building was watching him. Taking a deep breath, Liam stepped inside. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Each step echoed unnaturally. Old patient records lay scattered. Some pages hinted at experiments. Dark and cruel. A sudden sound, a faint whispering, just behind him. Liam turned, nothing there. But a door in the far hallway slowly creaked open by itself. Curiosity pulled him forward. In one room, overturned chairs and a wheelchair sat in the center, facing a cracked mirror. A shadow moved across the mirror, though no one else was present. The whispers grew louder, forming words he could almost understand. "You shouldn't be here." Liam shivered, but the explorer inside him pushed onward. Liam moved deeper into the asylum. A sudden darkness enveloped him, his flashlight flickered and died. He fumbled to turn it back on, and when the light returned, the hallway looked different. Bloodstains on the floor led to walls that had been blank moments before. The asylum wasn't static. It was alive, changing with every step.
From the far end, screams echoed, patients from decades ago, trapped in eternal torment. Liam followed the cries to a locked door labeled Observation Room 13. His hand shook as he turned the handle. Inside, a journal lay on a desk, filled with notes from a doctor obsessed with the human soul and testing forbidden methods. The final page read, "Some minds are better left alone." Suddenly, the room temperature dropped drastically. Liam's breath formed clouds. He saw his reflection in a broken glass, but it wasn't his face. A pale, hollow-eyed version stared back, mouth opening to scream silently. The asylum whispered, laughed, and cried all at once. Liam realized he had become part of the building's story. Panicking, Liam ran through corridors that seemed endless. Each turn brought him back to the same central hall, where a huge mural depicted patients chained to walls, screaming silently. Shadows slithered along the walls, forming shapes that weren't human. Doors slammed, windows shattered. He was trapped, or perhaps the asylum didn't want him to leave. In what appeared to be the main operating theater, Liam found a large, circular symbol etched into the floor. As he stepped inside, hands, invisible but strong, grabbed him. He felt a cold force enter his body. The asylum fed on fear, on life, on souls. His mind began to fracture, memories of his childhood merging with the screams of the asylum's victims. Amid hallucinations, Liam remembered the legend. The asylum had been shut down due to a doctor's obsession with capturing spirits. The patients were experimented on, leaving them trapped between life and death. The building itself became a prison for these souls, growing more intelligent with each trapped visitor. Liam understood. He wasn't alone. He could hear dozens of whispers, hundreds of eyes watching from walls and floors. Determined, Liam tried to retrace his steps to the entrance. But every hallway led him back to Observation Room 13. Panic set in as the asylum twisted reality around him. He screamed, and the walls seemed to scream back. In a final attempt, Liam smashed the journal to the ground. Light erupted from the pages, revealing the faces of trapped patients. For a brief moment, he saw an exit, bathed in pale sunlight. As he ran, a shadow shot from the ceiling and grabbed him. The last thing he saw, the asylum smiling, walls bending to contain him forever. The building fell silent again, waiting for the next curious soul. And now, we step into a place forgotten by time. Deep in the heart of the forest lies Dunwich Village, abandoned decades ago after a string of mysterious disappearances. Locals say it's cursed. Those who enter are never the same again. Tonight, we follow Alex, a daring explorer, as he uncovers the terrifying secrets that lie within. If you value your sanity, you might want to stop listening now. Tonight, we journey to a place forgotten by time. Deep in the forest lies Dunwich Village, abandoned for decades after a series of mysterious disappearances. Locals say the village is cursed. Those who enter are never the same again. And tonight, we follow Alex, a daring explorer, as he uncovers the terrifying secrets that lie within. Alex parked his van at the edge of the forest. The path to the village was barely visible, overgrown with thorny bushes. As he stepped closer, a chill ran down his spine. Broken houses, shattered windows, and the eerie silence of a place long forgotten greeted him. A faint fog swirled across the ground, and he felt watched. The wind carried whispers, faint, almost indecipherable, as if the trees themselves were speaking. Alex's flashlight flickered across old shops, homes, and a dilapidated town square. Suddenly, a rocking chair in one house moved on its own. Shadows darted in corners, disappearing before he could focus. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, but curiosity pushed him further.
Inside the town hall, Alex discovered a wooden box covered in dust and strange carvings. Inside was a small, blackened idol, a humanoid figure with hollow eyes. A sudden whisper echoed, "Take me, or remain forever." He felt a pull in his chest, as if the village itself was speaking to him. Hesitant, he placed the artifact in his backpack, unknowingly binding himself to the curse. As night fell, the village transformed. The empty streets now echoed with screams and laughter. Figures appeared in windows, blurred, distorted, sometimes looking like people he had known. The fog thickened. Alex realized the village wasn't abandoned. It was inhabited by trapped souls, feeding off the living. From the corner of his eye, Alex saw a child wandering aimlessly. Its eyes were black, empty, yet it smiled at him. When he stepped closer, the child vanished. Behind him, a door slammed. Turning around, a figure emerged from the shadows, a woman in tattered clothing, her face partially burned away. She whispered, "He brought it, he brought it." Alex felt pain in his head, visions of past victims flashing before his eyes. Hands clawed at him from walls. The artifact pulsed with an unholy light. He tried to drop it, but it remained in his backpack, as if fused to his body. The village had marked him, and he was not allowed to leave. Every step brought new horrors. Houses shifted, streets changed direction, faces appeared in walls and windows, screaming silently. Alex could hear voices, some crying, some chanting in unknown languages. His flashlight flickered, and when the light returned, the village seemed older, decayed, as if centuries had passed in minutes. In the center of the village, Alex found an ancient stone altar. Symbols were carved deep into the stone, emanating dark energy. Whispering winds turned into voices. Offer, or stay. Shadows formed humanoid shapes, surrounding him. The artifact lifted itself from his backpack and floated above the altar, glowing ominously. Alex tried to flee, but the village had other plans. Doors disappeared, streets looped endlessly. Shadows attacked, cold and intangible, yet their force was real. The artifact pulsed faster, almost like a heartbeat. Each pulse amplified the horrors around him, making the village alive, conscious and malicious. Amid chaos, Alex realized the village itself was a trap. A prison created by dark forces centuries ago. The idol he carried was the key, binding the souls of anyone who touched it to the village forever. The figures he had seen, previous explorers, were all trapped, mere shadows of themselves, feeding the curse further. Desperate, Alex smashed the artifact on the altar. The village screamed, houses shaking, windows exploding, shadows swirling violently. For a brief moment, a path to the forest appeared. He ran, chased by invisible hands and whispers. Just as he reached the edge, he glanced back. The village stood silent again, calm, waiting for the next curious soul.
And now the story is the Forbidden Hospital. Tonight, we enter a place no one dares to step inside. Far away from the city, hidden in thick woods, lies an abandoned hospital. Once a place of care, it's now a chamber of forgotten horrors. Locals whisper about screams that still echo through its halls at night, about patients who were never discharged. Tonight, we follow Ethan, an urban explorer, who thinks curiosity is stronger than fear. But tonight, the hospital has its own plans for him. Ethan parked his van at the edge of the forest. The hospital loomed ahead, towering, broken windows like staring eyes. The doors creaked as he pushed them open. Inside, dust and decay filled the air. Old wheelchairs and rusted beds sat abandoned, but every corner seemed to watch him move. He took a deep breath and stepped further in. Every step echoed in the empty halls. Papers scattered across the floor revealed patient names, dates, and strange experiments. Whispers floated down the corridors, a voice just behind him calling his name. He turned, nothing. A sudden shadow moved across a far wall. The hospital seemed alive, waiting, testing him. In one room, Ethan found an old surgical table. Bloodstains, long dried, covered the metal surface. A wheelchair slowly spun on its own. A faint giggle echoed, though the room was empty. The lights flickered and for a moment, Ethan saw a figure, a nurse, face pale, eyes black, standing by the doorway. He froze, then it vanished. Ethan explored the records room. Patient files told horrific stories, mysterious disappearances, forbidden experiments, and treatments that were far from medical. One file had a drawing of a shadowy figure with hollow eyes. As he read it, a cold hand touched his shoulder. He spun around, no one was there. The hospital wasn't empty, it was inhabited by ghosts of the past, feeding on fear. The hospital seemed to shift. Hallways extended into darkness, doors led to rooms that hadn't existed before. Ethan heard moaning from the walls, whispers forming words he could barely understand. You shouldn't be here, leave. A shadow passed through him, intangible, yet cold enough to freeze his blood. He realized he was trapped in a place that lived on terror. In the old psychiatric ward, beds moved as if pushed by invisible hands. Patients' belongings, broken dolls, tattered clothes, floated midair. The room pulsed with dark energy. Ethan felt pressure on his chest, as if the building was squeezing him. The shadows whispered, "Join us, forever." In the corner, Ethan found a large cracked mirror. His reflection moved independently, twisting into grotesque forms. Eyes staring from within the glass were not his own. He could hear faint screams echoing inside the mirror, the trapped souls begging for release. A voice whispered, "Once you look in, there's no escape." Ethan ran down a stairwell, steps creaking under his weight. Shadows climbed the walls beside him, stretching impossibly. Every step he took led him back to the same hallway. The hospital twisted reality, a maze designed to trap those who dared enter. At the top floor, he found the operating theater. The room was bathed in a faint red glow. A dark entity stood in the center, a figure with human shape but hollow, glowing eyes. It whispered Ethan's name, promising pain and despair. Walls shook, windows shattered. Ethan realized he had awoken something ancient, bound to the hospital. Desperate, Ethan tried to run, but the hallways changed with every turn. Doors vanished, ceilings dropped. Shadows lunged from walls, whispering promises of eternal torment. He stumbled into the basement, where countless bodies, patient and explorer alike, were suspended in the air. Their eyes stared blankly, watching him, pleading for escape. In the deepest room of the basement, Ethan found the source, a pulsating black orb. It emitted whispers and screams simultaneously. The hospital itself seemed alive. The orb reached out, pulling him in. His vision blurred, screams echoed in every corner of the building. Then, silence. The hospital sat quietly again, waiting for the next curious soul.
And now next story is The Silent Woods. Welcome to a story that unfolds deep in the heart of a forest, where no human dares to enter. They call it the Silent Woods, abandoned, cursed, and filled with whispers of the past. Many who entered never returned. Some came back, but not the same. Tonight, we follow Lara, a daring explorer who believes curiosity is stronger than fear. But tonight, the forest has other plans. Lara parked her jeep at the edge of the woods. A dense fog hung low, crawling along the forest floor. The trees were tall, their twisted branches like claws, blocking sunlight. As she stepped in, a chill ran down her spine. The forest was eerily silent, no birds, no wind, nothing. But something was watching. The silence broke with faint whispers, almost indecipherable, coming from nowhere and everywhere. Each step Lara took made the whispers louder, forming words she could barely understand: go back, or stay forever. She looked around, nothing visible. Yet shadows flitted between trees, always at the edge of her vision. After walking for what felt like hours, Lara stumbled upon an old cabin. Its windows were broken, and the door hung off its hinges. Inside, she found old journals, filled with sketches of creatures with hollow eyes and twisted limbs. The pages described sacrifices, dark rituals, and whispers that could drive people mad. As she read, a cold hand seemed to brush her shoulder, but no one was there. Lara left the cabin, but the forest had changed. Trees seemed taller, paths longer. Shadows now moved on their own, creeping closer. Figures appeared, children, adults, all staring blankly. She realized, these were not ghosts, they were trapped souls, forever bound to the silent woods. Near a clearing, Lara saw a stone altar covered in strange runes. A black stone sat atop it, pulsating with a faint, ominous glow. As she approached, whispers became screams. The forest seemed alive, branches reaching like hands to stop her. She touched the stone, and visions of people being dragged into the forest flashed before her eyes. Panicking, Lara tried to retrace her steps, but the forest had twisted reality. Paths looped endlessly, each turn led her deeper into darkness. The whispers grew louder, now chanting her name. Her flashlight flickered and died. She was completely alone, or so she thought. Shadows began forming faces on the trees, contorted, screaming, angry. The air grew thick, and the ground seemed to move beneath her feet. Whispers turned into voices, taunting, threatening, laughing. Lara realized she was being watched by something far older than the forest itself. A figure emerged, tall, cloaked in darkness, with glowing eyes. Its presence alone made the forest feel alive, every branch, every leaf moving at its command. The whispers now became a deafening roar, screaming in her ears. Lara ran, but the entity seemed to anticipate every step, always ahead, closing the circle. Hours felt like minutes, minutes like hours. The forest no longer had a sun or sky, only endless fog and shadows. Trees shifted positions, creating impossible mazes. Lara's sense of reality faltered. She couldn't tell if she was walking in circles or being drawn into another world entirely. Desperate, Lara ran towards a faint light in the distance. It seemed like the edge of the forest, a way out. But as she approached, the shadows formed a wall, closing in. The entity reached out with black tendrils, trying to pull her in. The whispers now screamed, "Join us, or remain forever." Lara leaped through the last beam of light, and fell onto the forest floor outside the silent woods. She was free, but forever changed. Behind her, the fog moved, swallowing the forest as if nothing had happened. And if you listen closely tonight, the whispers continue, calling for the next curious soul to enter the silent woods.
And another story name is The Forgotten Lighthouse. Welcome, brave viewers. Tonight, we venture to a place abandoned for decades, perched on a jagged cliff overlooking a stormy sea. They call it the Forgotten Lighthouse, where keepers vanished mysteriously, leaving only whispers and shadows behind. Legends say the lighthouse itself hungers for the souls of those who dare enter. Tonight, we follow Mark, a curious traveler, who thinks courage will keep him safe. But tonight, the lighthouse has other plans. Mark arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Waves crashed violently against the rocks, and wind tore through his coat. The lighthouse loomed above, tall, broken, with windows like black eyes staring down. As he climbed the cracked steps leading to the entrance, a shiver ran down his spine. Something about the place didn't want him there. Inside, the air smelled of salt and decay. Old journals lay scattered across the floor, pages yellowed, ink faded. The previous keepers had written of strange occurrences, whispers in the wind, lights that moved on their own, shadows climbing the walls. A sudden noise, a creaking step above, made Mark freeze. No one was there, or so he thought. Mark explored the spiral staircase that led to the top. Shadows darted across corners, and a cold draft whispered his name. Mark, stay, forever. Finally, he reached the lantern room. Inside, he saw movement in the reflection itself. A figure appeared, tall and twisted, with hollow eyes. The lighthouse seemed to shake with laughter. Mark realized he was not alone. Descending the stairs, Mark noticed shadows merging, forming faces he recognized, previous keepers, trapped and twisted by the lighthouse. Whispers turned to screams, "Join us, never leave." The walls began to bleed salt water. Mark stumbled back, heart pounding. Mark saw visions. The original keeper standing at the top, the storm raging outside, a figure reaching through the lens, taking his soul. Every soul ever claimed replayed before him. The shadows stretched, whispering, "You should have stayed away." Desperate, Mark ran down the spiral stairs, but the lighthouse shifted. Doors disappeared, walls extended, and shadows lunged from the walls. The figure in the lens now appeared behind him in the reflection. Panic consumed him, and he realized he was already part of the lighthouse. The lantern blazed suddenly, a light brighter than the sun. Shadows screamed, twisting into monstrous forms. The entire structure seemed alive, breathing, pulsing, reaching for him. In the topmost room, the entity emerged, a figure made of shadows and light, eyes glowing like fire. It whispered promises of power and knowledge, but Mark knew the cost: eternal imprisonment. Mark leaped down the spiral staircase, hoping to reach the cliff's edge. Every step brought him back to the top. The shadows followed, whispering his name, stretching their hands to claim him. He realized escape was impossible. The lighthouse had chosen him. Finally, Mark saw the stormy ocean below. The lighthouse stood silent, its light flickering once, twice, and then dark. If you look at the cliff at night, the faint glow of the lantern sometimes appears, and some say, the lighthouse is still waiting, hungry for the next curious soul. The Forgotten Lighthouse, Part 2. After that terrifying night, Mark thought he had escaped the lighthouse. But the sea has a memory, and the cliffs hold secrets that do not fade. Days later, strange things began to happen. At night, he would see flickering lights from the cliff, even though the lighthouse had been abandoned for decades. Shadows moved in his room, whispering his name. One evening, Mark received an old, tattered journal in the mail, no return address, no explanation. Its pages were filled with drawings of the lighthouse, figures with hollow eyes, and warnings. Once chosen, the lighthouse never lets go. It calls you back, and those who ignore the call will pay the price. Mark tried to ignore it, but the dreams became worse. Every night, he saw himself climbing the spiral staircase again, hearing whispers grow louder, seeing shadows merge and reach for him. And each morning, he awoke with sand in his shoes and salt water on his sheets, as if the lighthouse itself had followed him home. Determined to understand, Mark returned to the cliffs, this time with friends. As they approached, the lighthouse appeared taller, darker, more alive than ever. The wind carried whispers that only Mark could hear. "You cannot leave, not yet." His friends laughed nervously, thinking it was the wind or his imagination. But the moment they stepped inside, the doors slammed shut behind them. The interior had changed. The spiral staircase stretched impossibly high, the walls pulsated with shadows, and the lantern at the top glowed a sickly green. Figures from Mark's nightmares materialized, the previous keepers, twisted and trapped, now aware of their new visitor. Panic set in. His friends tried to flee, but the lighthouse twisted reality, looping hallways and changing rooms. One by one, they disappeared, swallowed by shadows. Mark ran, desperate to save them, but the entity revealed itself fully, a towering figure made of darkness and light, with eyes that burned like fire. It whispered promises and threats: stay, or join the others. Mark realized he had been lured back, chosen again, and the lighthouse would never release him. In a final attempt, Mark reached the lantern room. The entity lunged, but he remembered the journal's warning: the light was both prison and key. He smashed the lantern. The shadows shrieked and recoiled. The walls trembled, and for a moment, the lighthouse seemed to shudder in pain. Mark and the few who survived fled, stumbling into the night. Even after escaping, Mark knew the lighthouse was not done with him. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he sees a flicker on the horizon, the green lantern glowing in the distance. And he knows, the lighthouse waits, patient and eternal, hungry for the next visitor.
The Forgotten Lighthouse, Final Part. After countless nights of terror and nightmares, Mark knew the lighthouse was not done with him. Its whispers haunted his mind, its green light flickered in the distance, and the shadows from the previous nights still lingered. But Mark was determined, he would end the curse once and for all. Mark contacted Elena, a historian and paranormal investigator, who had studied the lighthouse for years. She told him that the lighthouse was built on cursed grounds. An ancient ritual had trapped the spirits of all previous keepers inside its walls. If the lantern was ever extinguished in a certain way, the curse could be broken. Together, they returned to the cliff. The storm raged above the sea as they approached the lighthouse. It appeared larger, darker, and more alive than ever. Shadows slithered along the walls, reaching toward them. Elena whispered, "We have one chance, trust me." Inside, the air was thick with decay. The spiral staircase seemed endless, stretching higher than memory allowed. Figures from Mark's nightmares emerged, twisted keepers, faces hollow, eyes glowing. Whispers screamed, "Stay, forever." But Mark held Elena's hand and pressed forward. They reached the lantern room. The entity appeared, taller, stronger, its shadows writhing like snakes. It hissed, promising power, knowledge, and eternity if they joined. But Mark stepped forward, holding a silver relic Elena had found in the old journals, a symbol used to banish spirits and break ancient curses. The lighthouse shook violently. Shadows screamed and recoiled. Mark placed the relic in the lantern's center, and Elena chanted the incantation from the journal. Light burst forth, blinding and pure. The entity screeched in fury, its form twisting and breaking apart. The lantern cracked, sparks flying, and then, silence. The cursed shadows evaporated, the walls stopped pulsating, and the oppressive darkness lifted. The lighthouse, once alive with malevolent energy, now stood silent and still. The sea calmed, and for the first time in decades, the cliffs were peaceful. Mark and Elena climbed down the stairs, exhausted but victorious. They looked back one last time. The green glow was gone, replaced by the pale light of dawn. The lighthouse no longer hungered for souls. The curse had ended. Word spread of the heroic duo who dared to face the cursed lighthouse. Travelers returned to the cliffs safely, and the legends of the haunted light slowly faded. The forgotten lighthouse remained a lonely monument, silent and broken, but free from the shadows that once consumed it. Mark often looked at the horizon, knowing they had saved countless lives. The stormy nights no longer held whispers or screams, only the gentle crash of waves and the calm, unbroken silence of the lighthouse at last. And another story is The Beast of Blackwood Forest. In the heart of Blackwood Forest, villagers whispered about a creature that no one had seen and yet everyone feared. They called it the man-eater, a monstrous predator that stalked the woods at night, leaving no trace but terror. Hunters tried to track it, but none returned. One evening, Aaron, a young biologist, arrived in the village to study the forest's wildlife. Skeptical of the legends, he set up his equipment near the forest edge. That night, a chilling howl echoed through the trees. Aaron froze. The sound was unlike anything he had heard before, low, guttural, and full of hunger. The next day, villagers told him the story of the man-eater. It was said to be enormous, with glowing yellow eyes and claws that could tear through steel. It hunted alone, clever and patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Some said it could mimic human voices to lure victims into the woods. Aaron laughed nervously, thinking it was folklore. But that night, the forest proved him wrong. As darkness fell, Aaron heard whispers, voices calling his name. Shadows moved between the trees. Suddenly, something massive crashed through the underbrush. Aaron ran, heart-pounding, but the creature was fast, silent, and relentless. He could hear its breathing, wet, cold, and smelling of decay. Days passed, and Aaron realized he could not escape. The creature was not just hunting him, it was watching, learning, adapting. Traps failed, cameras were destroyed, and every attempt to flee ended with the same feeling: being hunted. The forest itself seemed alive, aiding the beast. Determined to survive, Aaron studied the man-eater's patterns. He learned it feared fire and loud noises. One stormy night, armed with torches and a flare gun, he set a trap. The man-eater emerged from the shadows, its yellow eyes gleaming, teeth dripping. Aaron held his ground, heart pounding, and ignited the torches. The beast screeched, a sound that curdled the blood, and lunged. In a desperate final act, Aaron led the creature into a ravine, where the storm-swollen river waited below. The man-eater tried to leap, but the current was too strong. With a final, earth-shaking roar, it was swept away, disappearing into the dark waters below. The village slowly returned to peace. Aaron, though scarred and forever changed, had survived. Blackwood Forest became just another forest again, but the villagers knew better. Legends die hard, and the whispers of the man-eater would never be forgotten. Next story is very scary: The Shadow in Raven Hill. Raven Hill had always been a quiet town, tucked away among misty hills and dark forests. But everyone in town knew the legend: a shadow that walked at night, feeding on fear and darkness. Children whispered about it, elders avoided the woods after sunset, and no one dared speak its name. One cold autumn evening, Lydia Asterisk, a journalist, arrived in Raven Hill to investigate strange disappearances. She set up her camera and notebook, determined to uncover the truth. As the sun sank behind the hills, a thick fog rolled in, swallowing the streets and whispering secrets. At midnight, Lydia heard soft footsteps outside her window. Shadows twisted unnaturally, stretching along the walls. A cold breeze swept through, and a whisper said, "You shouldn't be here." Heart pounding, she grabbed her flashlight and stepped into the fog. The forest seemed alive, branches clawing at her, leaves rustling with voices. She stumbled upon an abandoned mansion, blackened by fire long ago. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and decay. The walls were covered in scratches, as if something had tried to escape. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, tall, featureless, moving with impossible speed. Its eyes were voids of black, absorbing the light from her flashlight. Lydia ran, heart racing, but the shadow followed, silent except for the faint rustle of its movements. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed broken in Raven Hill. Every corner she turned, the shadow anticipated her moves. It whispered her deepest fears, twisting her mind. She realized this was no ordinary creature. It fed on terror, growing stronger with every heartbeat. Determined to survive, Lydia remembered the old town stories. The shadow could be trapped by light and fire. She found an old lantern, filled it with oil, and lit a fire in the center of the mansion. The shadow screamed, a sound that rattled the walls and chilled her soul. Flames licked the darkness, and for the first time, the shadow recoiled. In a final, desperate act, Lydia threw the lantern into the grand fireplace, which erupted into a roaring blaze. The shadow shrieked, twisting and contorting before vanishing into the flames. Smoke filled the mansion, but when it cleared, the darkness was gone. The town slowly returned to normal. The fog lifted, the hills looked peaceful again, and the whispers ceased. Lydia, exhausted but victorious, knew she had survived an encounter most would never believe. Raven Hill remained quiet, but everyone remembered, some shadows are best left unchallenged. And another horror story name is The Haunting of Hollow Creek. Hollow Creek was a town abandoned long ago, swallowed by fog and secrets. Travelers avoided it, and even the bravest hunters refused to enter. Legend had it that the town's river had turned red one night decades ago, and ever since, strange shadows walked among the ruins, dragging the souls of those foolish enough to wander near. Ethan, an urban explorer and paranormal researcher, arrived with cameras, journals, and a map he found hidden in a library in the nearby city. He laughed at the villagers' warnings, dismissing them as superstition. But the moment he stepped into Hollow Creek, the air grew heavy and cold, and he felt eyes watching him from every broken window and cracked doorway. Night fell fast, and the fog thickened. Ethan heard faint whispers calling his name. The streets were silent, but shadows moved in corners, vanishing whenever he looked directly. As he explored the old church at the center of town, he found inscriptions on the walls. Markings he later learned were warnings from the first victims. The symbols begged visitors to leave, but Ethan pressed on, driven by curiosity. Suddenly, a figure appeared, tall, skeletal, with hollow eyes glowing faint red. It didn't move like a human, it glided, passing through walls and doors. Ethan ran, heart pounding, but every street seemed to stretch endlessly, looping back on itself. The river's water now reflected twisted faces, screaming silently at him. Ethan realized the town was alive, or cursed. The shadows multiplied, each step he took feeding their hunger. Doors slammed shut behind him, and the wind whispered terrible secrets. The river had claimed all who dared, and now it wanted him. Desperate to survive, Ethan remembered a legend. The town could only be freed by confronting the heart of Hollow Creek, the place where the river had first turned red. Guided by faint lights and his journal's notes, he reached an old mill. Inside, the air was thick with decay, and the floor was slick with centuries of water and blood. The heart appeared, a massive shadow, pulsating, with eyes that pierced Ethan's soul. It spoke without words, promising power, knowledge, and escape, if only Ethan would surrender his spirit. Ethan hesitated but remembered the journal's instructions. He must use fire and light to break the curse. He ignited every lantern in the mill, surrounding the shadow in fire. The entity shrieked, a sound that split the air and shook the ruins. Ethan threw a mirror into the center, reflecting the flames, and the shadow screamed again, writhing, twisting, and screaming the names of the long-lost victims it had claimed. Finally, with a deafening roar, the shadow exploded into sparks and ash. The mill trembled, and then silence. The fog lifted, the river's water cleared, and Hollow Creek looked almost peaceful, though the ruins would forever bear the scars of centuries of terror. Ethan emerged at dawn, exhausted but alive. He had survived where others had perished. The town was free, but the legend would live on. Hollow Creek remained abandoned, and travelers whispered of the brave explorer who had faced its horrors and lived, knowing that some darkness could only be conquered by courage and light. The Curse of Dreadmore Manor. Dreadmore Manor sat on the outskirts of a small village, an old, dark, and dense mansion, abandoned for centuries. Villagers said that at night, spirits and ghosts roamed its halls, and anyone who entered never returned. Part 1 Arrival. Ethan and Clara, two urban explorers and paranormal researchers, decided to uncover the manor's secrets. As they approached the mansion at night, the wind howled, and the doors creaked open and closed on their own. Strange whispers came from the old stone walls, and the darkness seemed alive. Part 2 First Encounters. Inside, they discovered old paintings and journals. One journal read, "The guardian of Dreadmore Manor has become the master of souls. Whoever enters will become his." As Ethan picked up the journal, the old clock stopped, and a cold breeze swept across their faces. Shadow-like figures began moving in the hallways. Clara whispered, "This is just the beginning." Part 3 The entity revealed. At the bottom of a staircase, they found a large room where a strange energy concentrated. A figure emerged, a black cloak, glowing red eyes, and long, sharp claws. This was the entity that had ruled the manor for centuries. Without words, it seemed to say, "You will remain here forever." Shadows and spirits swirled around them. Part 4 The Trap. Ethan and Clara followed the journal's clues. The entity could only be weakened by pure light and a ritual. They set up candles, mirrors, and fire traps in the central hall. The entity tried to destroy everything, while spirits circled them menacingly. Every moment was filled with suspense, horror, and fear. Part 5 The Final Confrontation. At 3 a.m., a storm began, and the entity launched a full attack. Clara started the final ritual from the journal, and Ethan positioned mirrors and candles perfectly. The entity shrieked, shaking the walls, while spirits revealed their true horrifying forms. The combination of fire and mirrors weakened it, but in a last desperate attempt, it tried to trap Ethan and Clara. Part 6 Breaking the Curse. Finally, Clara completed the ritual, and the full light and fire destroyed the entity. Its scream echoed through the manor, then faded to silence. The old curses broke, and Dreadmore Manor's darkness vanished. Ethan and Clara survived, witnessing the manor now silent and abandoned, but no longer cursed. Part 7 Aftermath. The villagers declared the manor safe, and the brave could enter without fear. Ethan and Clara recorded their notes and footage, sharing how they had ended the manor's curse. Dreadmore Manor became a symbol of warning and adventure, a place of darkness and horror, but one that could be survived with courage and knowledge. Whispers of Black Hollow. Black Hollow was a village surrounded by dense forests and mist-covered hills, a place abandoned by most travelers and avoided by locals after sunset. Legends told of a cursed well at the center of the forest, where voices of the lost could be heard, luring anyone brave, or foolish, enough to enter. Part 1 The Arrival. Amelia, a folklore researcher, and her friend Marcus, a documentary filmmaker, arrived in Black Hollow to investigate these legends. The villagers warned them to leave before nightfall, but they were determined to document the truth. As dusk fell, the fog rolled in thick and heavy, swallowing the narrow paths and creating shadows that seemed alive. Part 2 The First Night. That night, as they camped near the edge of the forest, strange whispers began to echo from the trees. The voices called Amelia's name, soft but insistent. Marcus tried to reassure her, but the air grew colder and heavier with each passing minute. Suddenly, the fire flickered and went out, leaving them in complete darkness. Shapes moved in the fog, circling silently, just beyond sight. Part 3 The Cursed Well. Following faint whispers at dawn, they discovered the ancient well. Its stones were blackened with age, and the water inside reflected distorted, screaming faces. Amelia leaned over, and the voices grew louder, more urgent. Marcus tried to pull her back, but invisible hands seemed to grasp at their ankles, forcing them to their knees. A shadow emerged from the well, a tall figure, with hollow eyes that glowed faint blue and hands like twisted branches. Part 4: The Haunting. The shadow followed them relentlessly through the forest, moving faster than any human could. Every path they took looped back toward the well. Their equipment failed, cameras flickered, and compasses spun wildly. Whispers told secrets of their fears, regrets, and darkest memories. It became clear. The well was a trap, feeding on souls and amplifying their fears to break them. Part 5: The Ritual of Light. Amelia remembered an old manuscript she had found in the village library. It described a ritual to cleanse the cursed ground, using mirrors, fire, and the words of the lost. Desperate, they prepared the ritual at the center of the forest, lighting torches and arranging mirrors to reflect the moonlight onto the well. The shadow attacked, shrieking, twisting, and contorting as if fighting against the light. Spirits of previous victims emerged, some trying to stop them, others silently guiding their hands. Part 6: The Final Confrontation. The ritual intensified, and Amelia chanted the ancient words. The shadow shrieked louder than the wind, writhing as the mirrors and fire trapped it in a circle of light. Marcus poured oil over the torches to make the flames stronger, and together they completed the final step, thrusting a mirror into the well to reflect the combined light of fire and moon. The shadow screamed one last time and dissolved into sparks, leaving the forest silent. Part 7: Aftermath. The fog lifted, and the forest looked calm and serene, though the scars of centuries of terror remained. Amelia and Marcus survived, their bodies exhausted but their spirits unbroken. The villagers, who had watched silently from afar, now understood that the curse had finally ended. Black Hollow would forever hold its dark history, but at least now, no one else would fall victim to the whispers of the well. Welcome to another story. I warn you that if you are brave when listen this story, because this is very horrible story. This story name is The Last Door. The night was cold, and the rain hit the windshield like small stones. Sarah squinted through the storm, trying to follow the faint glow of the GPS. Her car's wipers groaned with every swipe. She had taken a wrong turn hours ago and ended up on a road she didn't recognize, narrow, winding, and lined with trees that leaned inward like watchers. When her car suddenly sputtered and died in the middle of nowhere, a wave of panic rushed through her. No signal, no lights, only the sound of the rain and the occasional crack of distant thunder. In the distance, she saw a dim light flickering through the trees. A house. Against every instinct screaming at her to stay put, she grabbed her phone and flashlight, stepped into the rain, and made her way toward it. The house was old and massive, with peeling paint and tall, black windows that reflected no light. A wooden sign hung by one chain, swinging in the wind. She couldn't read the faded letters. She knocked once. The door creaked open by itself. Inside, everything was silent. The air smelled of mold and something else, something rotten. "Hello?" she called out. No response. She stepped into the main hall, her flashlight beam dancing across dusty furniture and cobwebs. Then she noticed it. Along the hallway were 4 closed doors, all identical, each with an old iron number nailed above it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her heart raced. Something about those doors felt wrong, like they were waiting for her. As she turned to leave, she heard a faint whisper behind her. "Open the last door." Her flashlight flickered. She froze. The whisper came again, louder this time, right behind her ear. "The last door." Terrified, she ran toward the entrance, only to find that the front door was gone, replaced by a blank wall of cracked wood. Panic set in. She turned back to the hallway. The first door slowly creaked open by itself. She saw darkness inside. Then a pale hand reached out, dragging along the floorboards, its fingers long and wet, leaving a trail behind. She screamed and stumbled backward, hitting the second door. It burst open, revealing a figure hanging upside down from the ceiling, its head slowly twisting to look at her, its mouth opening wider than humanly possible. She fled toward the stairs, but the third door banged open. A child's laughter echoed, followed by the sound of tiny bare feet running toward her from the darkness. Shaking and crying, she had nowhere left to run. Only the fourth door remained closed. The last door, the whisper returned, this time from inside her own head. Her hands, against her will, reached for the handle. The metal was ice cold. As soon as she turned it, everything went silent, the storm, the whispers, the footsteps. The door swung open. Inside was her car, parked in the middle of the road. Rain falling, headlights off, and in the driver's seat was herself, staring blankly ahead. Then the version of her in the car slowly turned to face her, eyes completely black. The door slammed shut behind her. The next morning, a police officer found Sarah's car on an abandoned road. The engine was cold. The driver's seat was empty. But when he looked into the nearby house, there were 5 doors in the hallway. And the last one was slightly open.
Welcome to another story. This story is horror too. The Hollow Village. It began with a letter. Daniel Reed, a 32-year-old freelance journalist, had received an anonymous envelope one cold October morning. There was no return address, no name, just a single piece of aged paper inside, written in shaky black ink. They're still here. The village is not empty. Come to Hollow Creek before the harvest moon. At first, he thought it was a prank. But the name, Hollow Creek, tugged at a distant memory. His grandfather had once told him stories about an isolated settlement deep in the northern woods, abandoned after a mass disappearance in the 1950s. Whole families gone overnight, no bodies ever found. Curiosity turned into obsession. 2 days later, Daniel packed his camera, recorder, flashlight, and a few essentials, then drove north. The road narrowed until it became little more than a dirt path. Thick pine trees pressed close on either side, swallowing the light. His GPS lost signal miles before he reached the rusted sign that read, "Welcome to Hollow Creek." Population. The number had been scratched out. The air was unnaturally still. No birds, no wind, only the creak of the car's engine cooling when he parked near what used to be the town square. Weeds had overtaken the cobblestone streets. Houses stood silent, their windows black like empty eye sockets. He pulled out his recorder. October 10th, Daniel Reed arrived at Hollow Creek. Population 0. Atmosphere oppressive. Then he noticed something odd. Every house door was slightly open, as if someone had left in a hurry, or was expecting him. The first night, Daniel set up camp in what had been the village hall. Dusty banners hung from the ceiling, and there were children's drawings still pinned to the walls, stick figures holding hands under a blood-red sun. At midnight, while reviewing photos, he heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate, gravel crunching. He turned off his lamp and peered through a crack in the boarded window. Nothing, just darkness. Then came the sound of a door gently creaking open, somewhere down the street. Another, and another. By the time he counted the 4th door, Daniel realized something chilling. No wind was blowing. The doors weren't moving on their own. The journal. The next morning, Daniel explored a house on the edge of the village. Inside, everything looked frozen in time. Plates on the table, a coat on the rack, even a pot on the stove long rusted through. Upstairs, in a bedroom, he found a leather-bound journal on the nightstand. The entries began normally, talking about farming, weather, family gossip, until midway through the last page. September 21st, the Hollow Men came again last night. They don't speak, but they listen. If the door is closed, they knock. If the door is open, they enter. We must keep the lights burning. The final entry was smudged, written in frantic strokes. They're inside the walls. Daniel felt a sudden drop in temperature. He turned to leave, but as he reached the stairs, the door to the house quietly swung shut behind him. His heart raced. He forced it open, stepped into the daylight, and found something new on the ground that hadn't been there before, a muddy barefoot print. The second night, rain poured relentlessly that night. Daniel stayed inside the hall, wrapping himself in his jacket. Around 1 a.m., the footsteps returned, but this time, there were many. Dozens, moving in perfect rhythm. This story isn't over yet, it continues in my next video.